My name's David Bierman. I'm the principal of Safe Environments Home and Office Testing Services, and we've been doing indoor air quality and mold investigations since 1990. So I'm been around the block with mold, many thousands of buildings, in and out of crawl spaces, up in attics, in the worst situations, best situations that you could think of with regards to mold. So my job is to try to give you an overview of the mold situation and how it relates to buildings and moisture and all those sorts of things. So, as you can see here on the left is a Petri plate that was taken from a refrigerator, and on the right you can see some elevated moisture readings due to a water intrusion. So first thing to understand is that molds are everywhere. They're ubiquitous in the environment. That means they are naturally occurring and our bodies have adapted to deal with molds. It's just that when molds find a nice niche, things change. So what you need to know? Well, what causes mold problems? What are some of the health issues related to mold problems? What are you going to do when you find mold issues? What to do in all your construction practices so you don't create mold problems, and how to protect yourself from litigation, which unfortunately is a big issue in the mold arena. Well, what are molds? Well, molds are part of the natural environment. They are part of the kingdom fungi, along with rots and yeast. And their job in the natural world is to digest things. They're our nature's garbage men. They basically break everything down. So anything organic that's not alive is food for the molds. And that's their job. So when they see a house, it's not living unless you're living in a tree house, right? Their job is to start to break things down. And so what you put up, it takes down. And they live on cellulose, and other organic carbon-based materials, which means is they'll grow in petroleum, because petroleum is a carbon-based material. Anything that's got carbon in it, molds will work on it. As you can see here, on the right, you see a piece of gypboard. Now, the molds are not living on the gypsum because it's not carbon-based, but it's living on the paper between the gypsum. And paper is like pablum to molds, because it's pre-digested already, right? But because in this case the colony is so established, it has enough capacity to get through the gypsum onto the other side for some more food. And you can see here that in between are the roots. We call them the mycelium of the molds. What you see on the surface, like in the picture of the Petri plate, you're seeing the fruiting bodies and the spores. For molds, the spores create the color. So when you see something like the color of my shirt, which would be a cladosporium colony, okay, you'd be looking at the spores. And in order to see a lot of color, you're looking at millions and millions and millions and millions of spores, because molds are microscopic. It's only when they get large enough in their colony size, they become visual. If we could see all the molds that we were breathing, it'd be like a storm in here of particles. We're just sucking on all those particles all the time. Now, you're not a mold guy, so you don't think like that, but because I'm a mold guy, my mind kind of goes that way. Okay, so some of the types of molds, there are thousands and thousands of molds out there, various different species, and in fact, we haven't even categorized all of them. But the common ones are probably 20 or 30 common ones that you see in the environment, in the indoor environment per se. Aspergillus versicolor on the left, as you can see the hyphae, which is sort of the long, narrow, what we call that basically the stalk. And then we have sort of a crowning, like a dandelion, actually, dandelion crown. That's the fruiting bodies. And at the very tip are the spores. And in the middle is penicillium. Now these are all photomicrographs, so these are all looked at under the microscope. The right is acremonium, the football, we call those the football spores. They're fairly large and they're very common in the environment. And then we have the yeasts. And we're all familiar with yeast, especially in San Francisco, because San Francisco bread, right? Is that right? Everybody loves that sourdough bread, right? Unless you're sick with mold. Okay? But it's the yeasts that are common in the area that help create the sourdough bread. Now, if you look at the right one, that's a Petri plate. And along with the actual species of molds that we may have floating in the air, we also have hyphae, or we call non-sporulating. That means they can't form a spore per se, but they're just pieces of hyphae that end up settling on the plate. That's why they're white. Actually, to the left is Aspergillus terris, which is what we call the earth color Aspergillus. So it's sort of brown in color. And the mycologists, when they do analysis of plates, they'll read what types of molds they are by the colors of the colonies. And that's a differentiating technique that's used when things grow up.